All right, POIs in the chat, please. And I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Many people in the status quo engage in long-term relationships that become a codependent mess. They lose their sense of self, and they lose the direction that they believe that they should take in life. Many people also stay in relationship out of complacency, out of comfort, out of fear of the unknown, even if that relationship is abusive or just subpar. This motion has the ability to change some of this for many, many people. 3 pieces of framing at the start of my speech. First, 4 pieces. Firstly, we think the detail of the specifics of the sabbatical can be determined relationship to relationship. This is something that partners are able to set themselves. And they're probably the best equipped to be able to set themselves. And even that conversation already opens up probably areas of their relationship that they possibly haven't considered before, which already gives insight to both of them. Second piece of framing. In the status quo, there is a norm that you should always be together, right? People look weirdly at you if you and your partner don't sleep in the same bed. People look weirdly at you if you do take regular breaks. I would say this norm that exists currently is bad. 2 structural reasons. Firstly, it originated in times that are not reflective of current situations. That is to say, when people had very short lifespans and a long-term relationship meant something very, very different of like 1/4 of the length. When people engaged in marriage and were within close proximity all the time due to things like material necessity, the need to protect, for example, the women that you're with, or because of like other economic conditions. Or also because thirdly, economic conditions didn't allow you to like even travel or separate for longer periods of time in a sustainable way. The present conditions on all 3 are, of course, different. Second reason for why this is bad, though, is that it is oftentimes violated asymmetrically, which is to say, within partnerships, people who are, for example, more economically privileged and enfranchised, which usually tend to be men, are oftentimes able to execute breaks on their own will without the other partner's consent. Things like long work trips, right, or like lies about that and whatnot, also allows them to do this. And women currently don't have sufficient access to this, and this motion also equalizes this. Third piece of framing is that many people stay in long-term relationships due to inertia. This is for a couple of reasons. A, there might be no explicit or glaring issue, even though the relationship is suboptimal. B, there actually might be issues that would be glaring to you, but given how much time you spend with your partner and how that has framed or shaped your frame of reference, you do not acknowledge them, right? Because you largely spend time with them. Or thirdly, you're just risk averse and don't want to engage in something else or explore something new. This motion will change that. And the last point of framing is that couples already do breaks in the status quo. However, and this shows 2 things. One, it shows that there's already a natural proclivity to want to do this, which means irrespective of the norm, I think many, many people want to do this. But 2, it means that without the norm, the way that people do breaks currently are very bad because people stress about it. They're like, why did this happen to me? Is my partner about to leave me? And oftentimes then act up during those breaks, do something bad that they regret, something that sabotages the entire relationship. One argument then about how this motion allows couples to make healthier choices, aligning better with their preferences. Many reasons as to how this can happen. Firstly, though, you are able to get more insight and clarity during those breaks. How does this happen? A, you are willing to have a break from that relationship and have the chance to think about what it is from that relationship that you actually want. Because within relationships currently, many things happen that we don't actively think about or that we don't actively talk about without us having the time to reflect on this. When you are alone, you're able to reflect on how your relationship has been or discuss that relationship with your friends. You're better able to know what it is that you actually expect from a relationship and what it is that you actually don't want. 2, though, you get also more insight and clarity on what you want from yourself. You finally have the time to reconnect with the person that you were before that long-term relationship, before you were living together. What were your hobbies like? How much time did you spend with your friends? Is there something of that you would like to reintroduce that you believe would make you happier and possibly an even better partner for your own partner? Because if you're more energized and happy with where you are, then you're also a better partner for them. Secondly, though, I think you oftentimes find elements of yourself that you couldn't have pursued with the partner that are now available to you, and that you maybe would want to pursue a lot more now, given that you have the opportunity. Which, note that you can act on this in whatever way you want. You can bring this up with your partner and integrate that, or maybe for you this is the tipping point, and you might want to engage in this more instead of the relationship. Thirdly, we are able to weed out bad partners, because many partners are bad. Not bad in explicit abusive ways, although many are as well, but many are just subpar. They do the bare minimum. They blame you for a lot of the things that you are doing, which means that the second that you have the time to think and talk with friends about this, you're able to reflect on this. Lastly and fourthly, though, maybe your partner is great and you haven't been appreciating them enough. And finally, when you're without them, you realized all the little things they did for you, everything, and how they kept thinking about you and how that impacted your life massively, right? Theo, sure.
So if your case is correct, and every time you take a break, this acts as a sort of like mini referendum on the relationship, why are people likely to be nonchalant about these breaks, or like not be stigmatized at all?
Well, because it's a norm, that's why it's not going to be stigmatized, right? And I think the longer it's a norm and the more experience people have with this, the better they will also get with this, right? So the more they will be able to use it. But also, I think there's a natural tendency for you to just not want to mess up your relationship. So you probably want to use the break in like a healthy way, or you also want something good for your own well-being. So you also want to use the break in the healthy way for your own well-being, right? But this means that we have covered all the grounds, right? Maybe your partner is suboptimal. Maybe there's something that you would want to change. Maybe you want to be alone altogether and separate from the partner, or maybe your partner has been amazing to you and now finally you will be able to appreciate them. Whatever the situation is, long-term relationships require this. Why does this then have to be regular and not just a one-time thing? Because things change. Your own preferences change. Your own situations change, especially as you age and whatnot. But also your partners change. Very often a partner is a certain way during the first year, but then they're not a certain way during the other 2 or 3 years, right? Which is also something that is good to be able to reflect. We have covered every single circumstance in which a relationship can happen. And for all of those, this gives both partners more choice, more agency, and ultimately a better life. Very, very proud.
I think that's speaker for their speech. Hello.
Okay, this good?
Yes.
Cool. Opening opposition stance is very simple in this round. We think that whether or not you take a break should be specific to that relationship. I'll explain why people do this well and generally think through whether they want to break or not. It should not be a social norm, because if genuinely people think there's nothing wrong with the relationship, you'll just be unhappy when you stay apart. The second thing is that we obviously support social norms that say you should not be completely isolated with just your partner. So we support norms that say you have a social life outside of that relationship. We think most people do that already. I'll prove that in my speech as well. I just want to note that it is very sort of demeaning for opening government to adjudicate why this relationship is not great. I think there are 2 reasons why people are generally good at deciding whether they want to separate or not, or whether they want to take a break or not. The first thing is that they are going through that relationship and they know themselves the best. They are the only person who knows their preferences the best, what their interests are. They can notice this. But secondly, I think that the vast majority of people have close friends. They have family members who also understand their thought processes, and there are like 3 or 4 people at least that they trust that they can then give feedback on. So it's not just like, like you're just staying in this relationship, it's not working because of inertia, etc. A lot of people just know themselves the best, but also have strong support systems. I think that's just the vast majority of people. Before I get into argumentation, I want to refute their argument on like the one argument they make on clarity and reflection. I have 2 responses here. The first thing is, as I said, the vast majority of people have a job that's different from their partners. And then you talk to other people about your relationship. No 2 people people have the exact same interests or hobbies. So one person likes soccer, the other person does not. So you go to a soccer match and you make friends there and you talk about how your relationship is going. All of these things exist for the vast majority of people. I think, therefore, with this context, with how the vast majority of people view relationships and live through relationships, I think that self-reflection is better when you don't spend time apart. Why is that the case? Because you're living through that relationship on our side of the house. So you have fresh memory of exactly, for example, X bad thing that this partner did. If, for example, you reflect on it a month down the line or 2 months down the line, you might forget some details or your memory might not be that fresh. But the second response here is that changes in preferences are better observed by individuals in relationships on our side of the house. This is because when, for example, you're staying like you're living with a partner, you can very easily notice how your preferences or your interests have changed, how your personalities have changed. But if you're on a massive break and don't have contact with the partner, it's easier to tell whether like your preferences or your interests, etc., have changed. So on both these grounds, I don't think that the only argument they make stands. The first thing I want to do is talk about why people generally just live unhappier lives on their side of the house, and a lot of these relationships don't work on their side. The first question I want to ask here is why you are in a long-term relationship. The reason for this is not just like there's inertia, but the reason that you choose to stay up from after the threshold of 6 months or a year is because you genuinely click. You share interests with this person. You're comfortable in each other's company. And note critically, this is not just, and you also just know that it's not just about sex or any kind of instant gratification, but you have a deep emotional bond. So I think just on a very intuitive level, what opening government and closing government do is that they pressurize these individuals who are just generally happy in their lives and in their relationships to separate from their partner for 4 months or 5 months or 6 months. I just think there's no need for this. So we just win on this specific subset of people on our side of the house. But even if you don't buy that, the second thing I want to answer within this argument is what happens in the time off. I think there are a few things. The first thing is that a lot of people, and I'm buying into this is a very small subset of people, but the magnitude of impact is quite high because they're very vulnerable. A lot of people don't have anyone to go to. And it's not just like a simplistic analysis of, oh, I just spend time with my boyfriend or girlfriend. But for a lot of people, are just antisocial. They don't click with a lot of other people, or for example, might not have great relationship with parents. And in those cases, a partner provides them with immense stability. And if they find someone after 5 years of looking for someone and like hookups that they didn't really like, and they finally click with someone, we don't want these individuals to then separate. So we went on this subset of people, even though they are low in number, just like they feel the impacts the hardest on us on their side of the house. But secondly, if for the vast majority of people within the time off, you're likely to live less comfortable lives. Why is that the case? This is true for two reasons. The first thing is just like constant and consistent stability. It's great. Like being in a relationship all the time is really convenient for you to know that you have someone around you. When you had a bad day at work, you know that you can go home and rant to someone. You lose these kinds of things on their side because I think that if you're in a relationship, there's sort of an obligation on you to be there for the other person, and we think that's good. So in the 3-4 months or a year or whatever, you don't have this consistent stream of support. We think that's bad. But secondly, I think it's also just you have a daily routine, and that's comfortable and that's nice, and we're completely fine with people following that daily routine insofar as that's something which is work for them. Like you're living together, your stuff is in your boyfriend's place, etc. We think therefore people fit into that daily routine, and you disrupt that daily routine for no reason for a lot of people. So this just means that in the time off, you are unhappy in general. But the third thing I want to do in this argument is explain what happens once you come back. The second reason the second question in terms of stability, the reason why that's important is the context of most people. Most people live very unstable lives. Their mental health might not be great consistently. The job market is unstable. They might have anxieties about their promotions, etc. For all of this reason, a relationship gives you immense amounts of stability. For 5-6 months or a year, you don't have that, and I think that's bad. Before I further explain this argument, XK.
If people are able to decide on go-to breaks despite the norm against it in the status quo, why can't a couple decide to have breaks infrequently or not at all on hours?
First of all, I don't think we don't support a massive norm where you don't take breaks. Literally, in my stance, I said the norm we support is that people have the choice to decide whether they want to take a break or not. That's the norm that we support on our side. The third question I want to answer within this argument is what happens once you come back. I think this relationship is weaker on their side for two reasons. The first big thing is that in that span over here, you're not there for the other person's highs or lows, right? So you just inherently feel less close. You feel like you've missed moments in this other person's person's life. So intuitively, after a year, when you come back together, it just feels like a reset. So this just means that in the long term, this relationship it requires more effort and more mental energy. A lot of people might not then be in the space to do that. So either these relationships don't work after that, or they just feel less close to the person. But second of all, there's also just a lack of trust, right? For example, when you're catching up with what happened in this 6-month period, both the partners are thinking whether she's telling me everything or not. So there's just a lack of trust that's built because of this break you take and because of the time that you spend apart. And I think that's really bad, because in a lot of cases, these relationships don't work. Even if they work, they're just weaker, and we're not fine with that. The final thing I want to do is talk about couples with children. I think this is really, really unstable for those. Children often can't understand these complex, nuanced norms. So often they think this partnership is broken or this marriage is broken. They might not come together, but also children require stability. They want parents to stay in the same home, especially with a lot of LGBTQ partnerships not be recognized by law. This is specifically important for those people, so we win on those fronts too.
I thank that speaker for their fine speech. DPM. Yes.
Three parts to this speech. Firstly, on the reflection process. Secondly, on relationship longevity. Thirdly, on the weighing and the comparative. Firstly, on the reflection process, government bench claims that people do not reflect enough on their relationships and are unable to assess the quality of it and are therefore stuck in it out of complacency and a sunk cost fallacy. I want to note a couple of things, but before that, I want to note that all their impacts stem from this reflection process being fruitful, being informed, being rational. If we can break this, the vast majority of their impacts fall as well. The first response I have to this, bullshit. You can already reflect in the relationship. Unless you eat, sleep, and do everything with your partner for 24 hours, 365 days a week, then maybe their argument makes sense. But the problem is partners have different lives. Partners go to different workplaces. Partners go to different universities. They have different social groups as well. Sometimes these social groups might overlap, but in a lot of cases they don't. What that means is you can already share with your friends about who your partner is like, what their partner is like, what your thoughts on your partners are. So first and foremost, you can already reflect, I do not think this is exclusive. But secondly, note, in a response to Kostab, they go like, oh, Kostab doesn't know how relationships work. You don't have to, be apart for 3 months. But presumably, if relationships are so entrenched, if it's so massive, and the problem is so deeply entrenched, probably 2 weeks of reflection are not enough. Probably 3 weeks of reflection are enough. You probably need a month and a half to reflect on the deep intricacies of your relationship that are not very explicit, right? Because remember, this is the person who is in the relationship. As the third party, it's easier to realize that X is abusive towards Y. But if X and Y are the people in the relationship, then you probably need a lot of time to actually reflect. The reason this is important is that all of our impacts are people who genuinely have no other place to go, people who genuinely cannot take a break. All those impacts can activate because they have to be away from their partner for a very long period of time. But thirdly, and this is crucial because this flips their mechanism, we think gaslighting and actually overlooking the worst qualities of your partner are more on their side. Here's why. Here's an intuition pop. I was in a relationship with someone a while back, right? We broke up, and in the time period, I knew it was the right decision. 6 months later, I was like, maybe they weren't that bad. The reason for that is because when you're away for your partner for that period of time, even though you're reflecting, your attachment to them outweighs perhaps your ability to rationalize the fact that they're actually being bad towards you. What that then means is you gaslight yourself more into believing in those 3 weeks of sabbatical, maybe they're not that bad. Maybe they're kind of good. Maybe it was a mistake, right? So for all those reasons, gaslighting is worse on their side because the intensity of the proximity is far away and you're taking a break on your own. The fourth thing I want to note, and this is crucial, because they say that subgroups are shit, friends are shit. And in response to the Kostab's POI, they bring up this thing about subgroups. And I mean, I have no idea what subgroups are. I presumably mean you're talking about friends, family, and all of the social support networks, right? Here's the problem then, right? Reflection, people who are in abusive relationships are probably the worst adjudicators of realizing that they are in a bad relationship. Oftentimes it is your family. Oftentimes they are your friends who tell you that you're in a wrong relationship and you don't realize that. The reason this is crucial is because when you're on a sabbatical, you're not with that person. So it's far harder for the third party to realize that you're being fucked over. Unless you are with them, then the third party can point out that this is not okay, that this is wrong. So you probably get a better informed opinion on this side, on our side of the house. But fifthly, I think abuse is worse on their side for two reasons. One, because you are not with your partner for prolonged periods of time and they're giving you breaks, people can be like, oh, but he gave you a break. Oh, Jack is such a nice guy. He let you take a vacation to the Bahamas or something, right? So for all those reasons, people actually sympathize with your partner. But secondarily, oftentimes on their side of the house, because partners generally know that your partner can take a sabbatical. In that sabbatical, you're not talking to them. They can do anything in that period of time. They can do A, B, and C. What that then means is that as a partner, you're more likely to become selfish in the time period that you are with them. What that means then is you're likely to be more abusive, likely to have more microaggressions towards them. So on the comparative then, there you have worse relationships on their side of the house, and this reflection process is not the best. What this then means is that the vast majority of impacts fall because the reflection process is the mechanism through which they flow from. The second thing I'm going to talk about then is relationship longevity. Before that, any POI from CG.
So your claim is that people believe that the break helps and therefore they have more license to do whatever they want in the counterfactual. The issue is people take whatever excuse they can to be selfish right now.
No. I agree with the latter part of the POI. What I'm trying to say is that when you're on a sabbatical and you know that your partner might be gone for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months, that is a point where it breeds insecurity because you're unaware what your partner might be doing. So for the time period that it's a non-sabbatical period, you're likely to be selfish towards your partner, meaning increasing the existing abuse that's happening. All right, relationship longevity. I have a couple of things I want to note. First of all, notice that a norm entails something being normal, something being usual. What that necessarily concludes then is that anything other than the norm, i.e. the opposite, is not normal and is unusual. This is important because what we think it does is that it tells partners who don't want to take a break that if you're not taking a break, you're not normal. If you're not taking a break, you're in an abusive relationship and you have no fucking clue, girl. What that then necessarily then means is that partners who actually genuinely might not have issues start taking sabbaticals for no reason other than the reason to take a sabbatical, right? What that then means is that they artificially construct problems within relationships, i.e. somebody might tell you that, maybe you should evaluate what he's doing a little more. And they might say at CG that, oh, this is reflection and this is good. But I think reflection is good insofar as it's based on something genuine. If you're artificially constructed problems, then that's not good, right? Secondly, I think what this leads to is premature sabbaticals. That is to say, on our side, if you're in a deeply abusive relationship, you will take a sabbatical on either side of the house. We concede. The problem is on their side, they take premature sabbaticals, i.e. sabbaticals for the sake of the sabbatical, right? It's been 3 weeks. Let's take a sabbatical for a week. It's been 4 weeks. Let's take a sabbatical for 2 weeks. The reason this is a problem is because if you're in the relationship and you're noticing something very problematic about your partner, but you constantly keep taking a break, that is a point of time that you might actually start justifying all that stuff to you because you're not facing the intensity of it and you're not proximate to the harm, right? But lastly, I think this breeds insecurity within partners, especially men. And what that leads to is that existing abuse just gets worse. Why do we then weigh over the other sides in this house? First of all, if this debate is about bad relationships, we think people in those cases are likely to take sabbaticals on either side of the house. The delta, however, is of relationships that are fine and they artificially construct their problems for them, meaning they go down the drain. But secondly, we also demonstrate to you that for the vast majority of people, going to and taking a sabbatical is often difficult because they are genuinely codependent on their partner and they cannot do so. And for Gov to access their impacts, the sabbatical needs to be long and fruitful, which means in that time period, those people have no alternatives. And lastly, we also demonstrate to you that children are going to be left on their side of the house where they genuinely need a cohesive, stable environment, which they do not get on their side of the house. I am so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech and everyone for a great top half. Member of government.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, just as a note, I might talk about a little bit of violence. If I do, it'll be very broad and basically through the term violence. But that'll be just about it in case that's a problem. And also POIs like this is best with your hand, and I'll get started. Okay. The overwhelming fear of not knowing who I could have been, what I could have become, what I could have done, where I could be, paralyzes relationships with a feeling of fear and regret that never allows people to escape and never allows people to feel fulfilled. It is this fulfillment that is uniquely tied to the norm of a break that only we can access and maximize on CG. I'll do a couple things. First, I want to refute some of OO. Then I want to explain why it's the case that you can only get the benefits of fulfillment and reflection in our world and why uniquely will provide you the mechanisms to get there. First of all, in terms of dealing with OO, the first thing I want to note is that they have an incredibly wish-washy stance, which is to say they support generically people being able to take breaks and doing that freely. That is not how the world works. This is a supports motion. There is no fiat for them to claim. They have to accept the world as it exists right now. And in that world, there are strong norms which say that you should stay in your relationship, that you should spend time with your partner, and that if you do take a break, you guys are probably going to break up, and that looks bad. So that is really, really not the claim that they can get. And that freedom of choice and the freedom to decide, like in certain instances, probably accessible to a very, very slim set of the many, many people that need to have access to this opportunity. A couple of other things. One, they say that you're going to become selfish and do things bad. I think this is only true if it teaches you that you actually really dislike your partner, in which case you probably break up. Two, insecurity, I think, tends to breed niceness more than anything. The problem with violence is that if you use that as a response, it probably pushes someone away. In contrast, when there is the norm that people can leave and you are worried about the trust, you probably compensate by behaving a lot better because you are worried that in that time that partner will go to resent you and dislike the way that you behave. But more importantly, if you keep taking breaks, as they say, like 2 weeks here, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks here, you're just going to break up. Like if you determined as a result of the breaks that you really enjoyed spending time away from each other, then it's unclear why you endure the violence and instead don't just leave. Like this is proof. You've showed us how you're going to determine that this wasn't a positive relationship to begin with. Moving on. What's missing in government is why you actually need to be on a break and why you need to get this norm to get the opportunity to grow as a person and as a couple. So the first thing I want to point out is why you can't do this in the workforce or inside a relationship as OO suggests might be possible. The first thing to note is that breaks are incredibly stigmatized. 99% of the time, when your girlfriend or boyfriend asks you, do you want to take a break? It's a test or it's a hint at the fact that they want to break up, or at least that's how people perceive it, right? Families and friends worry about you when they find out you're on a break. They don't think, oh, things are going well. They think, oh my God, this relationship must be in shambles. But the other thing is, even when you have free time, your free time isn't free. Now, OG tries to just wash this out. They say, you have an hour a day, like that's not enough. It isn't just about that. It's the fact that even in those 12 hours that you have, where you're probably not going to convince yourself to break up, there are other things and other norms that kick in. It's the fact that there are photos of you and your boyfriend around the house that prompt you into these nostalgic feelings that make it hard to remember or think about what it might be like to be on your own. Or it's the fact that you're expected to text regularly and give them updates, so you never feel really alone. It's really never like they're not there because you always have to be a good boyfriend or a good partner. The third thing is taking a break just isn't easy right now. You need access to services. You need to be able to live in a house over the course of like 2 months, and a landlord needs to say, yeah, that's fine, come stay here for 2 months. Or you need to be able to get a job on your own on like a term of literally like 4 weeks long, and a business needs to say, yes, we'll support that. What we get in our world is we get access to these services and these norms that enable that. So it becomes normal for businesses to expect that someone might be in a new area and in a new state for like 4 weeks at a time, and that they might want to employ you. So there are jobs that are available to that. Or it becomes normal to a landlord to say, oh, this person's going to be living here for 2 months. They don't need to put a massive down payment on this. This isn't going to be a huge pain in the ass. Instead, they can live, and the liquidity of the housing market can finally solve for these issues. So all of the sort of literal, practical, as well as psychological, emotional issues that impede people from being able to think and take these breaks are resolved on our side. Why then do you develop? Now, OG says you can think and just sort of figure out what you like. But there's actually a lot more to this process that is important, that enables thinking, and why that is discouraged in the world of OO. The first thing is, just on its own, you get to rest. Burnout destroys so many things about a relationship. Hearing your kid cry day in and day out destroys the things that you remember that you start to forget you loved about being with your husband or you loved about being with your family. That sort of burnout just makes you really, really unhappy, and being able to sleep for 12 hours of the day sometimes, like that's just really, really nice. The second thing is people use this time to get experience, even unimportant experiences. Just having those experiences and feeling that you lived a full life is really important to people. And why do you do this instead of just sitting on your ass? It's because people get bored, and there are narratives that exist in society that you ought to fill your time. So you spend time with your friends. You maybe take on a new job. This is about doing things that you never did. Scuba diving, for example, parasailing, like whatever you want. These are experiences that you missed out on that you get to finally take. And the reason that this is important is because that overcomes the issues of regret, which currently makes it very hard to commit. The third thing here is that psychologically, you don't feel like you're being disloyal when you think about questioning your relationship. And this is because there's a shift in the narrative, which is your boyfriend doesn't own you anymore. It is normal for you to be away for 2 months at a time and for you to think on your own. Fourth, we think that you get a better relationship. And the reason is, A, it requires a huge amount of trust, and B, you don't get to have sex whenever you're upset or worried, so you can't use physical dependency as a way to overcome the issues that exist in your relationship. Go.
Businesses can't just shift their offices. Most businesses don't have other branches. This was a point on convenience.
No, of
Might
course,
live
of course.
really
I'm
far
completely
from the
right.
office.
Yeah, you work somewhere else. That's the norm. That's what we're saying. Okay, better relationships then. It's the same reason that like long distance tends to be really, really productive for a lot of relationships, that you have to spend time apart, figure out how to deal with issues when you aren't in the same room, when you can't kiss each other right after you have a fight. Like that breeds a lot of strength that is much better for long-termism, which is what OO seems to want. Fifth, it makes your return a lot more stable in like sort of a pro-woman sense, which is to say, because men need to learn to be independent. They need to learn how to take care of the home, how to take care of kids, which is really, really valuable, by the way, because now as a woman, you can say, maybe it's not that bad if I go on this job because I go on this business trip and like try to advance my career once you're back in the relationship, because you know your husband knows how to handle the house now. That leaves a lot more freedom and a lot better things. What is the result of this? You feel just fundamentally much more fulfilled in your relationship. You know that you actually do enjoy it. You got to do the job. You got to do the school. You get to continue doing these things going forward. These regrets otherwise paralyze relationships and prevent the long-term growth that OO is looking for. The important contributions that we make then are a fewfold. One, we show that you actually need this break to be normalized in society to be able to actually get any of the benefits of reflection, therefore taking ourselves prior to OG. But second, the reflection is actually positive and allows for long-termism and relationship growth, therefore pushing OO out as well. On that ground, I propose. Yeah.
I think that speaker for a fine speech. Member of opposition.
Okie dokie. Hopefully I'm audible. POIs in the chat. I'll try and take one around like 5 minutes, 5:30. If I haven't taken one at like 5:50, you can unmute and yell at me, because I do kind of tend to get lost in the sauce a little bit. Okay. I think an important thing to note is that relationships are incredibly hard. Relationships require a lot of work in order to overcome issues, to reach a place of contentment, and to find compromise with your partner. The entirety of the Gov bench in this debate, and to some extent opening opposition, is they tell you you have the capacity to reflect on issues, but they never give you a tool by which you are capable of solving these problems. What we're going to tell you is that sabbatical will become a replacement for easy solutions, and which will replace alternative mechanisms to solve problems. And then secondly, why sabbatical is likely to manifest in incredibly toxic ways, blocking out any benefits that you get from the Gov bench in this debate. Firstly, let's jump into this debate. Framing. I think it's important to note that this norm will exist within the context of other existing norms which exist in the status quo around relationships. Things like expectations of monogamy, things like immense jealousy about your partner seeing or being with other people, things like expectations of what marriages are supposed to look like within a religious context. It is within these frames, people's other expectations of norms, which is likely to inform how sabbaticals manifest for different people in different contexts. I also want to flag that if they want to say people can overcome jealousy, like people are really dog shit at overcoming jealousy in relationships. I had my like little non-monogamous phase for a while this summer, and oof, that shit's tough. Okay, So what is this actual implication on this round? I think it's important to note that as OG frames, individual couples are likely to negotiate what this sabbatical looks like and the terms which are likely to be expected from each partner. What is the consequences of this? This means that power dynamics and patriarchal expectations are likely to manifest in terms of the expectation, structure, and terms of the sabbatical. This is things like, are you allowed to sleep with other people during the sabbatical? Who has to take care of watch the children? Who gets to stay in the house and who has to live in a random ass apartment where way down the street? All of these things mean that most of the time, women or people who are more marginalized or more economically dependent on their husbands or their partners are likely to be forced or shoehorned into taking sabbaticals as their partner expects or imposes to them. I think firstly, this just washes out any material about abusive relationship, but it is also sufficient to take down a lot of the responses, especially we get from CO. What does this mean? Firstly, on the stuff about children, I think it is almost always the case that women are going to be forced into positions where they are expected to take care of the children most of the time, because the narratives that you are the one who knows how to take care of the children, you're the one who knows how to take care of the home, the man doesn't have this knowledge, his job is more important, it pays more, which means now women, when they are on sabbatical, are forced into doing a fuck ton more additional labor on domestic tasks, are forced to be working a job, taking care of the kids full time. All this means that it's actually harder for these people to be reflect, but also put into worse circumstances. 2, this also leads to greater degrees of insecurity and conflict. That is, if my husband forces me to take a sabbatical where he is allowed to fuck other women and I am not allowed to see other men because of the underlying power dynamic or economic conditions of our relationship, it makes it much more difficult for me to reflect or feel good or even work, operate at all in a sabbatical, because I'm not reflecting on my relationship on fair, balanced terms, as the Gov bench wants to say in this debate, but I'm reflecting on my relationship within the context of me being deeply insecure, being marginalized, or feeling disregarded as my husband. And all of this is in the context that this is normal where couples determine the terms of their sabbatical as they should. And this is something that's imposed or internalized through things like religious or social structures about what sabbaticals are likely to look like. Note, economic dependence is also going to likely influence this. Why is this likely to be super harmful in terms of the context? First thing to flag. People tend to be incredibly irrational in terms of how they seek to solve problems in relationships. People all the time choose to have kids and failing marriages because they see that as a solution to their marriage. So if Gov wants to say that people are likely to solve or identify problems and solve them in hyper-rational ways as opposed to emotionally or conditionally dependent ways, I think that is a broad assertion that doesn't align with reality. Secondly, I think this is likely to be frequent and occur often for a couple of ways. Likely to be initiated by couples. Happy couples without issues are unlikely to initiate a sabbatical because they're already content. Note, this is OO's case, and it's quite absurd that happy couples are going to initiate sabbaticals super often because they're presumably likely content. Couples get into disputes often, which means these are probably catalysts for sabbaticals, and honeymoon periods tend to be short, which means when I come back to my partner, I likely feel bad and therefore want to initiate another sabbatical, etc. People are likely to use this as a conflict resolution mechanisms in ways they don't already in status quo. A couple of reasons why. Because it's easier to leave your partner in a short-term context than it is to discuss an issue that is present, because confrontation is quite difficult. That is, if I want to say that I would like to have sex in this certain way, or I don't like it when you treat me like this, that is much more difficult than just taking a sabbatical to actually try and resolve this issue. And this becomes more so at the point at which it is normalized to use sabbaticals as tools to solve problems in relationships, or as like a one-size-fits-all that you come back and you have a honeymoon period after your issues. On the comparative, you're more likely to solve these problems or just straight up leave your partner in a circumstance where problems are unresolvable in the first place, which means relationships are likely to be happier at the point at which you're seeking to solve problems directly rather than skirt them and actually address them front on. I'll take a POI from opening.
If your partner wants to fuck other people and doesn't allow you to on sabbatical, you now have the time to reflect on this and access support. Comparatively, you're still with the partner all the time and they can continuously gaslight you.
Yeah, so I think the problem is when you have this as an expected norm in society, it is likely to be legitimized, especially within broad cultural context. That is, in a Christian society, it might be more patriarchal society, it might be more normalized that the arrangement of sabbaticals, that men get to see other people and women don't, that these are likely to be broad social norms rather than individual manifestations, which means people are likely to be gaslit that this is how it's supposed to look. In a conservative family in Ohio, the expectation is likely to be, this is how your sabbatical goes, this is how problems happen, this happens normally. normally. So it's unlikely that it's going to be like, I'm going to notice as a problem. It's likely to be socially reinforced by patriarchal systems. Okay, so we think that people are less likely to solve problems in the relationship and use sabbatical as a tool to throw problems down the road. I think this probably means that relationships are worse and people are less likely to leave relationships when they're irresolvable problems because they can take regular breaks. This is like in high school when someone has like a shitty relationship and they just constantly leave that person and get back together, right? It acts as like a stopgap because leaving a relationship is economically scary, but it's also emotionally scary. And so if you can take this insufficient stop, you're actually not leaving yourself in a worse position, but you're able to keep a falling apart relationship together longer by using sabbatical as sort of a tool on this. Finally, on the economics, I think all of CG's response on the economics is preposterous. That like we'll now have landlords who are behind leasing an apartment to you for 1 month because this is socially normalized. We exist in a housing crisis, right? People already struggle to find housing. It's probably likely this would be very economically difficult. Also things like insurance, paying for your child's school, shared bank accounts, stay-at-home mothers are all fucked over by this proposal, and that's in a vastly economically precarious situation, which is irresolvable by just asserting that norms exist. For all those reasons, so proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for a very fine speech. Go with.
I take POIs visually, please. I'll take you at around like 5. Go like this, I'll take you, or I'll just call on you. You don't even have to bother. Also, I generally like it when people have their cameras on if possible. Nice. The biggest difference you notice when you wake up in a different bed on the first day of your sabbatical is that the ceiling above your face is different, that you don't hear your children shouting in the background, that their life is just completely different. There are no obligations, you don't have to go into work, things have just changed. And the reason this is very valuable is because this is a break from your everyday life. I think the other teams in this round are constrained by one thing, a lack of imagination, an inability to imagine what this world looks like when the norms are radically different. CO responses to our claims about how there's greater liquidity in the housing market, for example, is just to say, how could this happen? Right now, there's a housing crisis. Like, yeah, dude, we don't live in this world right now, unlike a world in which people are constantly fucking off to take sabbaticals in different countries. I think in those cases, it becomes really much more possible to take a break from your life because that is the definition of what taking a break from your partner is. You leave your current living situation. So, people start taking breaks from their current lives. This is a break from your partner, yes, but it's also a break from the person who you are with your partner, the person you're forced to be by your children, by your repetitive day job. And what that means is people feel empowered by a different place, even if it's just living with a friend for a while or your parents. You think to yourself, I can do anything I want to. I pick up an instrument, I can try skydiving. Even the mere thought that I could do these things and there's nothing I have to do right now is hugely empowering. There are a bunch of benefits to this. The first thing is we would posit that fulfillment is the most important thing to every human being. The satisfaction with your life, the happiness of where you are right now, and the ability to take a step back, think about where you are and decide, yeah, I'm doing this because I'm happy with it, because this is the right thing for me, makes your quality of life massively higher, even if there's nothing that materially changes in your house and home. But 2, right now, it truly is impossible for people to take a step away sometimes because they have no imagination. They don't realize that their husband, who can't make fucking boiled broccoli, has the ability to make microwave dinners and so that you can leave your home for a while. This becomes completely different in our world. You really have opportunity to become free. Yes, it's probably the case that people are going to face some obstacles. I'm sure Nicholas is going to have some amazing mitigation to this, but I still think that the benefit accrued to some human beings, a large proportion of human beings, maybe those are more privileged and have just allowed you to travel around more, but still people who matter, lots and lots of them, is really, really big. The second thing I want to do now is weigh against OG later, guys. So I think that what they tell us is that it's true. Sabbaticals do help reflection. Oftentimes they help with reflection on your relationships as well. But it's also true, that you're more likely or to a greater extent able to reflect when you're not next to your partner. The issue, though, is that their case is pretty specific to a particular context, right? Where people are really good at reflection when they're on their own, but also really bad at reflection when they're at home with their husbands, or if they and also happen to have really shit friends. Like they are really just picking the best case gov scenario and the worst case op scenario and comparing the gap between the two. I think OO is just like, right, that it's completely possible that some people can react terribly to this too, but they then also proceed to tunnel vision on straight up abusive, awful relationships, which also then narrows the benefits that they can get. One version of the CG extension that we could do is to say more people can reflect on their own and not with their partners than vice versa, or to say that in the median case, where people are okay at reflecting on their own, and less good at reflecting with a partner, that the delta is meaningful. But we think that this is an absolute dumpster fire, and we elected not to base our extension on this. CO tried to do this though, when they said that sabbaticals are worse for relationships because you don't solve problems and address conflicts. Instead, you just fuck off for a while and ignore the problem let it stew, which by the way, OO also mentioned. The problem with this is I just don't think this is true. One, that if you're conflict averse because you're afraid of pissing off your partner or losing the relationship, that you're also likely to decide that I'm not going to say anything right now because, like, you know, I can endure it for a bit longer. But two, I also just don't think that it's the case that having one is going to solve your problems either. Like, there's a hot take that we could give, which is like, maybe it's the case that your relationship is bad and that you might leave the relationship if you have these sabbaticals, but it's not necessarily good that they do this, right? Like, you might just have valid reasons to stay in a suboptimal relationship. So what I'm trying to say is that I think CEO's efforts have illustrated the problem with the top half as well. That is, relationships are complicated and messy, and it's really hard to establish delta. What we did is we focused on the biggest differences that kick in when taking sabbatical. What we've told you about self-development, about life satisfaction, and not allowing regret to build up over years and years and years, such that you're filled with regret on your deathbed, but also the massive benefits to fairness and solving the patriarchal issues that pin women down. Before that, OO.
Your case just makes our argument on stability stronger. You might pay higher rent. You live in a neighborhood where you don't know anyone. You might not want a new job, but it's just logistically hard for you to keep the same job, so you change jobs. This just increases instability in people's lives massively, and that's really bad.
I think people are much more adaptable than you give them credit for. Like, they are really painting a picture of the worst case scenario. I'm sure the judges can assess like the extent to which they think this is like frequent and common. Okay, fairness, equity, patriarchy. CEO give us a pretty sick case about power asymmetry in relationships, and they tell us that women get the short end of the stick constantly. 3 responses. The first is the burning question in the back of all of our heads when we heard them talk about how my job is more important, you can look after the kids, and therefore men are able to set the terms of the relationship, is this doesn't seem to be the case that the break from the relationship is the source of this power asymmetry, right? Like, it might be the case that in the household as well, there's an asymmetry. And we hear this all the time, which is like when both men and women have careers, that women do the laundry, for example, about how husbands functionally already get access to sabbaticals when they take a business trip, when women have to stay at home because they're the only one who can operate the fucking washing machine, right? And the second main response I have, because that was mitigation, is just to flip this and say the problem is that you often case negotiation and explicitly addressing this is the only thing that makes you realize that there is a problem, because they said that women might feel insecure and resentful when you have this chat and the man is fucking off constantly, and that's why in a large subset of cases women are now uniquely able to take a break from the relationship and give the men the kids. And that's huge, right? Because there's a lot of husbands, you can no longer use weaponized incompetence as an excuse not to contribute to housework at all. That's hours and hours of labor every single day for women that become slightly better distributed right now. I want to weigh this against the material you get from CO, which is that at best they're able to say that the relationship disproportionately hurts you, but in our case, you dramatically change your everyday routine and you make it such that women just literally get more sleep, which controls for your mood to a massive extent. For example, like, guys, women are pinned under the claim that the men just have no other choice, and they are trapped by their imaginations and their feeling that they can't leave the kids behind. We transform this, we allow people to fulfill their dreams. Vote CG.
I think that's speaker for the great speech. Op Whip.